No.
Welcome to the My Haunt Life podcast.
Hello, welcome to the My Haunt Life podcast. I'm Mike.
And I am Russell.
And this is part 2 of our haunt season recap.
In the last episode, we covered most of the haunts and events that we hit mainly in the Los Angeles area. And there were other things. We traveled to other states. We traveled to other cities. We had quite the jam-packed holiday season.
Yeah, traveling killed 2 of our weekends. So that's why we weren't able to hit as much as we wanted to in the Los Angeles area. But
killed 2 of our weekends and nearly killed me.
Yeah, that's very true.
Wow, I was exhausted.
But going to these other haunts in other states and in the same state 5 hours away, it's so worth it just for the experience, whether it be carpooling and road tripping with your friends and just having a fun old time, or just going and experiencing something. You know, last time we talked about going into something and not knowing. Try doing that in a city that you're unfamiliar with and don't know anybody there. You know, that just adds to it. So we'll start. We first made a road trip to beautiful Las Vegas to hit the Freakling Brothers Trilogy of Terror and Victim Experience.
There was this awkward moment of silence between the two of us.
Yeah, and that will get edited out.
Maybe, maybe not.
So this year, the Freakling Brothers announced a new maze, and it was the Coven of 13. I was so looking forward to this one. This was one of the top ones I wanted to see, that I needed to see, just because of Freakling Brothers' reputations and how well that their other haunts are. I knew this was going to be something amazing, and it was.
I felt the same way because this would be my 3rd year going back to the Freakling Brothers horror shows in Vegas, and I was so looking forward to this when they announced it, because unfortunately they did away with their the Circus of Horrors, which was absolutely one of my favorite mazes of all time.
Yeah, mine too. And R.I.P. Scorch.
Yeah,
we miss
truly.
you.
There's a character there that we will miss dearly, but we will have other encounters with that performer, I am sure. But yeah, they replaced one of their truly unique, creative, fun mazes with the Coven of 13, and they did not disappoint.
Oh no, just walking up to this and you see the towering, well, I don't even know what you call it.
I have no clue what you would call that character.
Yeah. But, you know, he's on stilts and he's just super high off the ground, and he's got this huge hood-ish thing. I don't know what they're called. I'm so ignorant when it comes to covens. But he was wearing a big pointy hat. And that's what I'm just going to call it. Someone can correct me.
So basically, he was this towering figure that you had to approach to gain entrance to the maze.
Yes. And then once you get inside, you're told there's a chosen one. And how the chosen one gets picked was awesome. And I, luckily, was the chosen one.
As was I when I went through.
Yeah, and I had no idea that I was the chosen one. I didn't know what was happening. What happened to me, I thought happened to everybody else in my group. And it wasn't until they rescued me and told me that I was the chosen one. And it was like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah, it's truly a fun maze. I was surprised actually at how dark and creepy it was in places. There's some areas that are pretty claustrophobic. There's some areas that are pretty intense. There's one crawling moment in particular that one actor, as I was moving across the floor, gave me one of the best scares of the entire season, I think. It was awesome.
That was a great scene.
Yeah, it just congratulations to the Freakling Bros, because, man, they really hit it out of the park.
Oh, yeah. And I just wish... I mean, I know their name is Trilogy of Terror, but I wish they could be like a quintuplet of Chaos or something. And JT, if you're listening and you hear that and you use it, it's copyrighted. It's mine. Don't take it. Gates of Hell is the R-rated haunt. It's borderline extreme. I guess to the casual haunt goer, it's considered extreme. And they also had Castle Vampire, which have been there last year. So we went through those as well. And
Castle Vampire in particular has always been a favorite of mine ever since the first time I went through it. It's, Freakling Brothers, their strength, I think, is creativity and uniqueness. And inside that castle maze, there are a couple of rooms in particular that are very unique, very creative. There is, I don't want to give away the secret of the room, but there is a room where, because, vampires are part of the mythology of this maze, where you walk in and they actually are able to create the illusion that you don't have a reflection in a mirror.
I love that scene so much.
It's absolutely one of the simplest and yet most brilliant things I think I've seen in a haunt. And the first time it happened to me was truly a magical moment. I was laughing so hard when I realized what was about to happen, and it was great. And the castle maze is so strong on production design and creativity. There's a couple of really great moments inside that haunt. I went through it twice this year, just because I'm such a fan of it. And the other one, Gates of Hell, I went through. It was odd for me because I attempted the victim experience, and I went through Gates of Hell afterwards the next night. So Gates of Hell seemed so tame to me.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I also did the victim experience this year, and I made it through. So that's 2 years in a row I survived it, and now I'm tied with good old Russell here as making it through. We're the only people that have made it through twice successfully. So no other podcast and no other website can claim that.
And
that's what we got going for us.
We should make reference. I did it twice the first year successfully, and I tried a third time this year, and I got messed up in a scene, hit some sensory overload, and ended up calling Purgatory, which is their safe word.
And Russell, I'm really curious about how you're feeling about this experience.
Well, oddly enough, I wrote an article which appears on a website.
What website is that, Russell?
myhauntlife.com.
Wow, that sounds like a great website, and I would want to go and read that article about your experience and the victim experience.
Well, interesting enough, if you are interested in reading my article about my pass through the victim experience, attempting a third time, I think you should also read another article. Would you like to guess which article that is, Mike?
Is it the one about planting flowers in the spring?
So, no, well, that, but the other one.
I don't know. Which article could you be talking about?
Perhaps Mike also wrote a very good article about the victim experience and what it is like to go to Vegas and attempt it. I think you should definitely read Mike's article. If you're considering attempting the victim experience, I think Mike gives a very good introduction as to what it is like as a patron to go there, and the vibe that you get from the crew, the cast, the creators of this experience. So if you're considering this, and if you want more information about the victim experience, check out the two articles that do appear on myhauntlife.com. Mike and I both have very different takes on this year, and I think they complement each other.
Oh, definitely. Your article brings out all of the feels. It's ridiculous. And mine is more of a do this, get pumped, do this, these are tips kind of thing. And, Russell's is seriously it's hard to read, especially going through and knowing what he's going through. Even if you don't know what he's going through, reading this, you'll be like, oh man, I feel for this guy. It's a very emotional article, so be forewarned.
Well, thank you. I should say, from both Mike and I feel the same way about spoilers. You won't be reading a lot of details of what happens inside. Reason being, what happens inside the victim experience is so intense and so completely unique and realistic feeling. Trust me, you don't want to know what goes on inside if you are ever considering attempting it. And even if you aren't, it becomes this mythology thing of what happens inside the victim experience is inside the victim experience. You have to go through it to understand it. No description would do it justice, in my opinion.
Oh, no. And the thing is, going back, you had told me this the first year you went through, but going through the second time and knowing what's about to happen and what's coming up makes it so much worse. I had to experience that this year by going through again, and it did. I knew what was going to happen next for the most part. There was some new things going on, but at the same time, the general flow was, oh, I know what's coming next, and oh, crap, this is going to suck. And it did suck, and it made it so much worse.
Yeah, knowing makes it worse, definitely.
Yeah, this isn't G.I. Joe. Knowing is not half the battle.
Yeah. But again, I think Mike and I both firmly recommend the normal 3 haunts that the Freakling Brothers present every year in Vegas. The new one, Coven of 13, is so much fun, and the other 2 are well worth the trek to Vegas. Just cannot speak highly enough about the creativity and the uniqueness of the scares of that group. They're wonderful haunts.
And I want to echo what Russell just said about being worth the trip to Vegas. Like, I can't stress this enough, and I try to tell as many people as I possibly can. But if you're into haunts even a little bit, seriously, make the drive. Even if it's a day trip and you do a turnaround at night, like, it's so worth it, and you will not be disappointed. I guarantee you. We can't speak highly enough of them and their haunts. Like, they're just so well done. The staff is top notch, and everyone there is just awesome. And it's on my list to do every year at this point. So it's just go support them.
I feel exactly the same way. And last year, I had the experience of missing out because of a job last year. I was not able to go except for one night to Vegas, which was a Monday night, and Freakling Brothers was open, so I was able to see the Freakling Brothers haunts last year. But I was unable to attend anything else because everything else was dark on the night that I went. And Mike had made reference to 2 other haunts that he spoke very highly of, and I was lucky enough to get to Vegas this year. I went and saw 2 other haunts, which Mike had recommended highly to me, and I'd heard from a few other people that were well worth seeking out when I was in Vegas. Those 2 haunts are called Hotel Fear and The Asylum, and they are right next to each other, basically in a parking lot.
Yeah, they're in the Meadows Mall parking lot.
I must say, these were so...
F-word, fun.
Just absolutely, it sounds ridiculous, but delightful.
Now you're using the D word.
I was so impressed, and I understand why so many people had recommended them to me. The production design on Hotel Fear in particular for me was so outstanding, so creepy, so dark, so completely pitch perfect. And the rooms in Hotel Fear were small and tiny and claustrophobic, and so the scares were very impactful because when a character came out, they weren't across the room, they were right next to you. It was a complete, wonderful, great time, tons of jump scares through that thing, and in case you haven't heard Mike mock me in the past, I am someone that a jump scare can get very easily. I love scares. I was jumping and screaming so many times all the way through Hotel Fear. In The Asylum, same thing, great production design, a couple of really creative scares in The Asylum. There were a couple of really great character moments in The Asylum. People behind wire and fences and bars that kept like reaching out and grabbing, and really effective moments like that for me. And also in The Asylum, there's a couple of rooms in particular that are very, very dark and creepy. So I had a great time at both of those haunts, and I would recommend, if you are going to Vegas, make time and seek those 2 out.
And you can do both in the same night. And what I mean by both is you can do Hotel Fear, Asylum, and all 3 at Freakling Brothers in the same night. Just make sure to get to one of them early. And actually, Russell, I have a question for you. So you went through Asylum. You worked at Ward 13, which is Asylum themed. Is there anything that you saw in Asylum in Vegas that you thought, oh man, this was so good, I wish we did this in our haunt, or anything, any criticisms by working in an Asylum theme and then going through a different Asylum theme?
For those of you who are unaware, I worked with Evil Twin Studios Ward 13 this year, which was an Asylum-themed haunt in South Pasadena, California. And going through the Asylum in Vegas, there's one room in particular which is sort of a... how do you describe it? A whiteout situation where your vision becomes very confused. Mm-hmm. It's a sort of an optical illusion room, and I love that. And I have encountered something like that in 2 different places this season, and I encountered it on a grand scale last year at the Queen Mary haunt in a sort of their freak show sequence last year. And that sequence inside the Asylum was so effective to me. And basically, you are in a situation where your vision becomes very disorienting because there's no points of reference in the room. It's all one color. So actors can hide very effectively, and it's really hard to trace your path and find your way out. And the other thing that I loved about the Asylum in Vegas is because of the permanence of those sets, there was a lot of heavy metal framing and bars and cages that the actors could hit and slam and all of that sort of jarring noise stuff. That's a very sort of different take on the asylum theme that we took. In our asylum, we actually took you through the patients' rooms.
Right.
And in the asylum in Vegas, it's much more an aggressive, patients are mad and angry at being caged, and that's sort of a different vibe than we went for. And I really liked that vibe in Vegas. It's just a different take on a similar theme, but I really did like the asylum in Vegas for the aggressiveness of the actors inside that haunt. And they were aggressive, and I don't mean touching or manipulating you in any way, but just the scares were high energy and high impact. There was one in particular where you're sort of walking down a hallway and you see the wire cage in front of you, but you can't tell if there's an actor there, and he pops out. That, to me, was one of the best scares in the whole asylum for me, because I was up front and leading the group, and he got me so good. It was so much fun. So, as Mike was saying earlier, you definitely can do Hotel Fear, the Asylum, and the 3 haunts at the Freakling Brothers. Definitely, it's worth the effort. Definitely, if you're going to Vegas, make a night of it. Do all of these. They are all well worth it.
And from Vegas, we made our way to San Francisco to do the almighty Blackout. We had a blast going there. This was typical road trip. It was Jake and Debbie and I. San Francisco was about 5 hours, 6 hours. I don't even know anymore.
Approximately.
Yeah. So on the way up, we left early in the morning on a Saturday, and we had no agenda. We didn't have to be anywhere by a certain time. We just went up. And on the way up there, we saw a sign that said Corn Maze, next exit. And we all looked at each other and had this, oh my God type moment. And so we pulled off and we went through it. And there were 2 mazes inside this giant corn maze. This year was a Wizard of Oz theme, so the mazes were actually shaped like the characters from Wizard of Oz. And they had a card, and you had to find certain things within the maze and get and punch a hole. And if you found all of them, you got a pumpkin. So we got a pumpkin because we found everything. And it was, in addition to the mazes, they had pig races, they had air cannon, tennis ball, shooting target, and if you hit the target, you got a pumpkin. They had a giant pile of hay, they had slides. They did have a nighttime haunt, a flashlight tour of the corn maze, which sounded awesome, but we couldn't stay that long. We had to get to where we were staying.
I was not part of this road trip because I was strapped to an electric chair inside Ward 13 haunt during this. So I missed the road trip up to Blackout. But yeah, I was so jealous because it sounded like you guys had such a good time at that corn maze.
It was awesome. It was so good. It was so much fun. And it was one of those things where it's like, it wasn't a destination, but you see it and it's like, well, we have nothing else to do. Let's do it. This sounds like fun.
Where was this located?
I don't know. Because I wasn't driving, I wasn't paying attention to the signs or anything. We were about an hour outside of Hayward or so. So it was probably 4 hours away, maybe.
Okay.
So,
right.
But yeah, if you ever see a corn maze in California, you should definitely stop at it because corn mazes are so great. It's a great way to spend an afternoon, and that's exactly what we did. There were things for little kids to enjoy, and there were things for adults to enjoy, and they have a ton of pumpkins, and the pumpkins were so cheap compared to the pumpkins in Los Angeles. A giant pumpkin there that would cost $50 here was like 10 or 15. It was ridiculous. So after the corn maze, we went to meet up with our friend Jessica, and she and her husband, Steven, shout out to Jessica and Steven, were kind enough to let us stay at their house. They recently moved from Los Angeles up to the Bay Area and are Blackout survivors as well. Thank
you very much to them for playing host. I came up the next morning and landed at their place and tried to grab a couple of hours of sleep after working all night at a haunt.
So since Russell wasn't there, we were looking for things to do on that Saturday night, and Jessica suggested we go to the Haunted Hornet. And the Haunted Hornet is a aircraft carrier. It's an old battleship. They do 2 haunts. I believe it's haunted as well. So it's kind of like the Queen Mary, where it's a boat that has mazes on it and it's haunted. So we went through 2 of the mazes. One of them was just your average run-of-the-mill, kind of stereotypical haunt. Didn't really have anything to do with the ship. But the one that had to do with the ship was incredible. This was one of my favorite things this year. It's in the bowels of the ship, and you go through everything. You go through the sleeping quarters, and you go through the bathrooms and things like that. And it's so dead quiet because you're on a ship and there's no sounds. And everything that they did, the scares were so effective because you heard nothing. There's no background music. You couldn't hear people walking. It was just random chaos that happened out of nowhere. It really felt like you were in the middle of a haunted scene because all of a sudden there's someone there in your face, like screaming, or you hear sobbing in the distance. And it was just very, very, very well done. I love the fact that they used the ship. The Queen Mary does a little bit, but it wasn't the same. And I think it's just because this was a battleship, whereas the Queen Mary is more of a luxury liner.
I talked to all of you after that. I wish I could have joined you that night, but it's interesting to me that each of you pointed to the silence of that haunt as being so effective. It's something that I heard each of you say separately.
Yeah, and it was, because when you think about it, you're never really in silence. You could be outside and no one else is around, but you'll hear the wind blowing, or you'll hear a bug, or you hear a dog bark or something down the road. But this was silence. Like, you heard nothing. You heard no wind. You heard no clanging of the ship. You heard no water. You didn't even hear yourself breathe. And that just added so much to the environment.
What else did you do that Saturday night?
So after the Haunted Hornet, we went to, I forget what mall it was, but there was 2 haunts in a mall, and I believe they were called Scream Park. And the fact that I can't remember them should tell you something. Do not recommend these at all. Don't waste your money in going to these. We went through the first maze, and it felt like we were the only people in there, including actors. We were joking that, it must be break time because there's no one in here. So we walked through that in about 3 seconds because there was literally no one in there to scare us. And it was just a bummer because we paid this money. It was like, hey, where's everyone? The second maze was better, but still really not anything worth mentioning. There was a few good scares, but overall that whole experience it just felt like a waste of time to us, unfortunately. So after all that, we went home, got some sleep, and then Russell showed up the next day, and we started our Blackout adventure.
So this year, Blackout did not seem to do a typical Halloween New York or LA or Chicago show the way they've done the last couple of years. They concentrated their efforts on San Francisco. They partnered with kink.com, which is an adult website production company that puts material online. Pornographic, I guess, is the way how you would describe that.
You guess?
So the location is key here because kink.com Studios is housed in what's called the Armory, which is basically a building of historical significance in San Francisco. It's been used for many things. Movies have been shot there. Studios have rented it out for numerous occasions over the years for feature-length films, used it as locations. There are standing sets which are currently being used by kink.com, and Blackout set up a haunt utilizing a bunch of these locations, utilizing these sets. And what it did was it lent this almost epic feel to the Blackout experience this year. This turned out to be one of my favorite Blackout shows in quite a while. It was well worth the trip to San Francisco. It was called Blackout Inferno. You met some characters who parallel characters in Dante's Inferno. And going into this, we were extremely excited, and we didn't know what to expect. They were sending through groups. Blackout has experimented in the past with doing groups, and this show, I think, lent itself better than last year to doing as a group. I think the interaction with the actors, it felt like a group show, and you got to experience things in a way that I think being with a group helped the experience. I know some people always want Blackout to do solo stuff and that you go through alone, but Blackout is always very good at what they do. And it's interesting either way. I thought this show lent itself to being part of a group because you kind of formed a camaraderie to get through some of the sequences. And some of the sequences are rough and intimidating.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was one scene in this Blackout that terrified me to my wit's end, like more than anything else this season. And I think partly that has to do with residue from the victim experience. But you know the scene I'm talking about. And...
yeah, it was terrifying me to watch that because...
yeah.
And also, it was very intimidating for me. Basically, what Mike is referring to is we encountered an extremely intimidating actor, and part of the victim experience in Vegas is physical aggression. You're being handled by usually professional wrestlers are staffing the victim experience. So you're dealing with very large people who know how to pick you up and move you. And inside Blackout, we encountered such a character also, and he basically picked me up and laid me across a table, lifted my shirt and started to get rather intimate, and then turned his aggression toward Mike, and which my perspective on you was very interesting because I was basically laying down, and this guy went over and picked Mike up, and since I was laying down, I literally thought this man was going to throw Mike over a refrigerator, which was in the scene. There was a refrigerator in the room with us. And my angle, because I was so low, close to the ground, I was terrified watching what the guy pick you up, Mike. It scared the hell out of me.
Oh, I was terrified because it's like, okay, well, getting picked up, sure, I can deal with that. But seeing what he was doing to you and seeing just things he had on him, like what is going to happen next, and that's what terrified me. Just the unknown of what was going to happen and the unknown of what this guy could do next, because he could literally do anything. This was a big boy, and he was, one look at him, it's super intimidating, and for him to mess with the rest of your crew and then focus on you, because everybody got attention, no one escaped, so you knew your time was coming, and not knowing how severe or aggressive he was going to be towards you, it was scary, man. Like there's no way around it. I was scared.
I'm glad you pointed to that, because that was one of the things that was effective for that scene for me. Is I was really concerned for you, and later when he turned his aggression to the other people in our party, there were a couple of moments where I was really concerned about the other guys in the group too.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, especially, I know you and Jake were both worried about Debbie because she's a Blackout version, and she, hasn't really been in haunts that were that extreme yet. And you guys, and I mean, that's the thing. Like, you're gonna be like that towards anyone you actually care about or have a friendship with, but
oh yeah, I get protective.
Yeah, totally.
I get very protective over my friends, and when I saw him pick you up, there was part of like this emotional reaction of, there's no way I can take this guy. I can't. Sorry, Mike, you're on your own. I'm really terrified about what's about to happen to you, but you're on your own.
Yeah.
So, and I did feel that way about the other people, because we did have someone who'd never done a Blackout show before, so I didn't know how they were going to react, and I think she handled it really well.
She loved it.
I was really, really worried about Jake, just because because there were three guys in the group, and he obviously went after us with a heavy amount of aggression. But that being said, it was a very effective scene, and what we're not disclosing here is there was sort of a lead up to this particular scene where you met a very odd motherly like figure who sort of led you into this very calm environment, and you basically entered what looked like your normal kitchen, and she interacted with you and she put you at ease, and then she gets interrupted by this very aggressive individual who takes control of the scene. So it was a very effective transition to go from that calm, odd, quirky moment to someone coming in and really wanting to mess your day up.
Mm-hmm. And as sick and twisted as it sounds, that's become one of my favorite scenes this year.
Oh, interesting.
It's just funny how it works because, and that's what Blackout does so well. They get you thinking, and I cannot stop thinking about that scene since it happened. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but at the same time, I'm just wondering how different it would play out if I stood over here or if I stood over there. Just the fact that it was so extreme, and that was probably the most extreme part of that this year's Blackout. And I think maybe that's because that's what I was used to with Blackout, so I wanted more. And that was only the one spot. I mean, maybe that's how drug addicts feel. You get that one little hint, and then it's like, oh my God, I want more. Give me more, even though it's really probably detrimental to your health.
Oh, that's interesting you say that, because for me, I think my favorite sequence of this year's Blackout was after you walk through the jail cell and you encounter the character who's talking about his father.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was my favorite sequence. And we went through Blackout 2 times in one night. We had bought tickets for 2 different time slots because we were traveling all the way from Los Angeles. Going back real quick, overall, the sort of the layout of the show was you entered a room that was very disorienting visually, and then you were given the instructions of how to get through the haunt. There were times when you had to regroup. There were times when you had to do certain things as a group, and you received those instructions, and then you started to go through the haunt. And you encountered a woman near the very beginning who is this very beautiful tribal-like character in a very wet, soggy environment with lots of water dripping down on you and around you. And she sort of set up the premise that you're going on a journey and you're going to meet people on this journey, and they give you sort of a mantra. They give you sort of this phrase to latch onto, which reoccurred during the show. And the phrase is the quote of, "We yearn for what we fear most." And that becomes a bit of a theme as these scenes start to unravel in front of you. Many of the scenes, when you there are characters who have gotten damaged or are damaged or psychologically marked or traumatized. And as they start to tell you their story, you realize that it's because of something in their life or something that probably they wanted that went bad. And that kept reoccurring for me. That was my interpretation of several of the scenes. There was wonderful, wonderful sequences. The location was epic in many ways. There were huge, massive rooms and spaces that they could explore. One scene in particular where basically a character asked us to chase him, and the space was large enough that we could. And he had a lantern, and he kept turning the lantern on and off. And we were literally chasing him through the dark sometimes. And the room was big enough for that to happen. And it was so exciting. And I got so charged by that because it was like this was the equivalent of Tag as a kid, just except in an adult haunt where you had just met a half-naked lady and she told you to go listen to this character. But that sort of epic feeling, I think, was the strength of Blackout for me this year, and the characters were so intriguing. And there are other characters we met along the way, including women who may or may not have been abused, a woman who accused you of doing something horrible to her child, and you interacted with her. So there's lots of very odd characters along the way, but for me, the strength of the show was you kept getting these really personal interactions where you felt the damage of the character you were interacting with. And that's why I point to the scene where the character is talking about his father and basically what his father did and did not give him as a child was the way I interpreted that. And that was also a very physically aggressive scene. We were kneeling, we were standing, we were kneeling. Mike got thrown up against a wall one time, and then the second time I got thrown up against the wall, and wow, he pulled no punches. That was violent. And then he came over and like really started messing with me physically. And it was very intimidating, but in conjunction with what he was saying about the responsibility of father and son, it really hit hard. It was definitely had an emotional element for me. So, congratulations to Blackout for that, for being able to keep the emotional element even with such epic play space. And those sets and locations were awesome and added so much to the show for me. Are there any other scenes other than the kitchen scene that we were talking about earlier that really hit you hard, Mike?
As far as fear goes, no. Because this wasn't typical Blackout where the things I fear is what they have done in the past. This felt more as like a walkthrough haunt with blackout elements to me, which was awesome. Like, don't get me wrong, like I loved it still.
One other part that I really enjoyed, which we've kind of joked about, is they did do a sequence which is very, very blackout, and that's the sequence in Complete Darkness, where you were given a guide basically and told to follow a path in complete darkness, and people just kept messing with you in the dark as you walked by.
Oh, that scene.
Yeah.
The second time we went through, you were behind me, and I heard you. I heard you whimper and yep, and I was like, "Is there a puppy behind me?" I was like, "Oh, it's Russell."
Yeah, they kept they kept like jumping out and like touching me and grabbing me, and yeah, I was doing a lot of yelp. Yeah,
that part was fun.
Because you were laughing at me, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed that because I've said it before. I'm very good in dark spaces of playing in my own mind. So, when Blackout puts you in that situation and you know that you're not alone in the dark, that's really effective for me. We don't actually want to give too much away of Blackout, and so we're kind of speaking around certain sequences. But yeah, it was a really, really great trip to go up and see Blackout, get to play in a new sort of environment, which I think was unique for them. I am so glad I made the trip to San Francisco, even though it left me completely exhausted and I got sick the day I got back. But yeah, it was well worth the trip, and I had a great time.
So we made our trips. We went to Vegas, we went to San Francisco, and this was towards the end of October. So there really wasn't a lot of time to do anything else. But luckily, I was able to hit a few home haunts, and actually Russell and I were able to hit one together. We hit Fear Station, which usually is not a home haunt. It's a pro haunt in Stanton, but I guess they had issues with securing a location this year, unfortunately. And Russell, I know you talked to them a little bit more, so you might have the full story.
Well, basically, it seems that they did have some location issues, and they thought they had something locked in place, and it ended up dissolving sort of right before the haunt season, and they just didn't have time to lock something else in place. So what they did is they actually found a home location, which they were able to use, and they turned themselves into a home haunt because the guys behind Fear Station are passionate haunters. They're great people. I run into Dustin a lot at the various haunt events around town, and basically they didn't want to go a season without anything. So, being the passionate people that they are, they created a home haunt even though they didn't have a location secure for something bigger. I think they will be back next year with something bigger. And this year, I really enjoyed. Unfortunately, last year I was working every night that Fear Station was open. So I was very happy that they were open on the night that we were hanging out, and we went and saw a play before that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the Fear Station haunt had a couple of really effective moments in it. One in particular it's hard to describe, but as you were approaching a room, a character gets taken away in front of you, which I thought was a very effective sequence.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Basically, like you see someone crying for help, and they get dragged away into around a corner where you can't see, so you know that you're about to encounter something. Yeah, there's some really effective things like that. I loved walking into a room and sort of walking into a very creepy character dining on someone, which was very creepy to me. So even though they are scaled down this year, apparently, I really enjoyed Fear Station, and I'm definitely looking forward to see what they do next year. I know they usually work with larger locations than they were at this year, and I absolutely love what I encountered this year, and glad we had a chance to check them out.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to see them last year in their full glory, and it was one of my favorites last year. So once I found out that they were doing something this year, I knew I had to go check them out. I had to go support them because they were one of my favorite haunts last year. So hopefully next year everything gets settled and they have a big location and they're back to their big glory.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing what they do next year.
And I was able to hit a few other home haunts this year. I hit the Klownhouse in Torrance, the Haunted Shack in Torrance, and Rotten Apple in Burbank. And the Klownhouse, shout out to Dawson, man. Like, good job. I met Dawson, who runs and builds the Klownhouse with a K, at the first year of Scare LA. We were in a lot of the same classes. And then the following year, we're surprise, surprise in a lot of the same classes. And then in the third year, once again, surprise, we were in a lot of the same classes. So just because I used to do a home haunt and he did a home haunt, we had a lot of the same thoughts and questions, and that's why we were in a lot of the same classes. And through that, we built a friendship. And I wasn't able to go last year, and I made it a point to check him out this year just to go show my support. And it was awesome what he's built, man. You know, for a home haunt, like these home haunts this year have just put mine to shame, and makes me never want to try to do one ever again, because there's no way I could get to the level that these guys are doing. And, you know, if you like clowns, or if you're afraid of clowns, you should definitely check them out next year. I believe the website is theklownhouse.com, and that's clown with a K. So check them out. That was just super fun. And all of his actors inside are, I believe, relatives and friends of his children. And so it adds an extra creepy vibe that there's little people running around in there scaring you, you know, because you're so used to adults, you know, it's like, oh, that's an adult. But when you see someone smaller than you, it's like, oh my God, what is this? What's going on? Who is this? Did he shrink? Like, you know, like there's just kind of like a little bit more that goes through your head when you see them. And plus they don't know the rules, if that makes sense. So if you have a little kid scaring you, they don't know that, you know, doing this or doing that is good or bad. They just go with what they think. And that is so much more effective than someone that knows what they're doing, as weird as that sounds. I know it sounds like it contradicts itself, but it makes sense in my mind, and that's what matters. And so down the road from the Klownhouse is the Haunted Shack, and that's also in Torrance. And going to this, I had never been before, but I went on a recommendation from Dawson to check it out after the Klownhouse. This was so great. Oh my God. It blows my mind that places like this are a home haunt. Same thing with Rotten Apple and Sherwood Scare, which didn't happen this year, and the Backwoods Maze, which is in Burbank also. But the Haunted Shack, they had a boo cam set up in front. So it had a couple buttons, and you could see people going through the haunt inside with a night vision camera. And when someone reached a certain point, you could press a button and compressed air would blow at them, or something would move, and you got to see their reaction and take a picture if you wanted to. And that was just ingenious. And to have that in someone's front yard, it was awesome. The haunt itself was great. And like the production was great, the actors were great. They had a couple tricks in there that just, it was like, whoa. And you think about it and it's like, oh my God, this is someone's backyard and this is happening. He's been doing it for 15 years and it shows. Like, you can see how much he learns and just updates things. And I had such a great time going through the Haunted Shack, and I will go again next year. That's how good it was. The last home haunt I was able to hit this year was Rotten Apple at 907 in Burbank. And I met Diane, who's the mother of Rotten Apple, and she taught a class at Scare LA. And I told her that I've gone to their haunt a few years in a row. And so I was lucky enough to see her and just tell her how much I enjoyed it and everything. So that was great. This year they had an Old West theme. And once again, knowing that this is in someone's yard, it just blows my mind. Like the production value, the walls, the actors, the gags they have inside. It's just insane. I do believe they have walkthroughs every year, so look for the walkthrough on that. Look through the walkthrough for Rotten Apple this year. And next year, if you go to Rotten Apple, make sure you get there early because the lines grow long. They were saying that the night we went, they had people lining up 2 hours before, and they cut the line off at about 9 o'clock, and they wouldn't let anyone else in line, due to city codes and whatnot. Luckily, we were able to get in line before that and go through the maze, and it was well worth it. Everything they do is just so well done. So good job, Rotten Apple. We love you.
Mike and I did hit a few more plays this haunt season. A couple podcasts ago, we discussed Dracula, which we saw in North Hollywood, which was a lot of fun. For the first time, this was something Mike was familiar with, and I don't know how long you've been going to this, Mike, but you turned me onto something which I am going to tell everyone I know about.
And that's exactly what happened the first time I went. So this marks the 10-year anniversary of this annual play at the Maverick Theater in Fullerton, and it's none other than Night of the Living Dead. the production that they have there is one of the best things ever. If you're into horror, if you're into Halloween, if you're into zombies, this will speak to you on so many levels and will make you an instant fanboy. There's a reason they've been going 10 years strong, and there's a reason that I've been going. This was my 4th time in 10 years going to see them, and it gets better every year. They add a little bit here and there with little tweaks, and just to make it fresh. And what they do and what they are able to pull off is just incredible. Whenever I have make new friends, like Russell was able to do this year, and Debbie, same thing, but I drag people to see this because it's so worth it, and I know it will basically change their life in a weird way. And so, I mean, Russell, like, what did you think about it?
Well, it was so absolutely cool. It was so funny because when you mentioned it to me, you said live version of Night of the Living Dead, and I was like, meh, okay, all right, sure. And you basically said, just we're going to do this. You're going to do this. Just trust me. We're going to do this, and you're going to love it. And you were absolutely right. I walked away. It's funny. I'd said I loved it. I think that's what the key thing here is. Also, because we were on the final night, they did sort of a speech at the end of the performance, and the love that is in that room, man, it's like the outstanding feeling. Even as the show was going on, it's one of those times, we've talked about it, you sense it inside a haunt when the actors are truly passionate about what they're doing. During that show, you could tell that this was something that everybody was completely getting and on board with, and the audience was into it. The actors were giving their all. It was sort of electrifying for me because it was one of those nights of theater that just made me feel really great to be in that room because something special was happening. You had said, oh, there's a couple of wow moments, and there are a couple of really good, wow, I cannot believe they just did that.
Yep.
And it's a very loving version of Night of the Living Dead, and they very carefully tweak a few plot things just enough to keep it fresh and interesting, but completely respectful of the original material. This was one of my favorite things of the season. Hands down. It just, I'm so glad you turned me on to this. And literally 2 days later, I'm a bit of a theater nerd, and yes. And I went to another theater nerd friend of mine, and I said, it's like, you, your wife, and your son are going to a play next Halloween. Trust me. You need to get with me. I will give you information. But next October, you are taking your wife and your son to a play. And he looked at me and went, what? And I said, trust me. And so, I because I know he will get it.
Right.
I know his wife, and his son will absolutely get it.
And that's the thing. I mean, they've been doing this for 10 years. Every night is sold out. So if you want to get tickets, you have to buy tickets right when they go on sale in early September. And I found out a little secret. The earlier you buy your ticket, the further to the front row you are. So because I bought my tickets the day they went on sale, we were in the front row, right in front of all the zombies, and they came and attacked us, maybe, kind of.
Really. Yeah, maybe that happened. Maybe. That might have happened. But yeah, I'm so glad you turned me on to that this year, because that's definitely one of the gems of
Please
this
stop
season.
saying I turned you on. So we went to that, and I also went to another one called Hammer of the Witches, and that was at the Loft Ensemble in Los Angeles. And this was really well done as well. It's a basic story about a coven that is using the basement of a mortuary to conduct their rituals. And there's a new girl that started working, and they needed her to be out of the picture, but she also is going to be part of it. And then one of the witches doesn't really agree with what's going on, and it's a great drama in a way. But the interesting thing is they do some rituals in there, and apparently it's pretty dead on to actual practices that are done, which I thought was really cool, because usually, you have a random play, a random production, and it's like, oh, just say yibba yabba goo frog leg stew, and that's supposed to be, real. But they were actually doing real things, which I thought was really, really interesting. I don't know if that's a yearly thing. It sounded like they have done a couple of productions of it. But if you do come across it, I would suggest it because it's definitely a good night.
And what's the name of that theater company again?
The Loft Ensemble,
Okay.
and they're in downtown LA.
Cool. Something that I finished out my season with is it's fairly well known, which is Unbound Productions do Wicked Lit. And they're well known. They sell out regularly, and usually what happens is it is out actually in a mausoleum. You're outdoors for most of the performances. And this year they did 3 rotating shows with sort of a wraparound story. I have been going to Wicked Lit for several years now regularly. It's so enjoyable. It's so different than anything else going on in Los Angeles. It's basically a play that you follow. And by follow, I mean literally walk and follow the actors as the play unfolds. And since they're in a mausoleum, it becomes this very creepy atmosphere. And in particular, Fall of the House of Usher was one of the tales that they told this year, which was very, very effective in a dimly lit mausoleum setting. And also they did a haunted painting story, which was extremely effective. The wraparound story was based on Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, which is one of my favorite Edgar Allan Poe stories. That was a lot of fun. So definitely Wicked Lit was another hit this year. It's something that if you've never done, I would highly recommend you check out. It's something that I think it's your cup of tea or it's not, because some people find it very stagey and theatrical in style, which I don't mind at all. It's not, even though it's somewhat an immersive theater piece because you're following the actors through an actual mausoleum part of the time or a graveyard part of the time, it still feels like very much there is a fourth wall to some degree. It's always enjoyable. Again, they sell out every year. Check them out if you've never been. If you're a theater nerd on any level, it's worth checking out. It's really fun, and it's a good fall Halloween sort of production. Very enjoyable. And the other thing I ended my season with just this a few nights ago, I did Sinister Point's Fear event, which was a sort of interactive game, I guess would be the way to put it, which was, again, Sinister Point doing something very different, very creative, which I admire them for. They're always trying to come up with something new and different. This was a sort of challenge event where you worked in pairs and you were watching your partner on a video screen. They would go into a completely dark room in which there were actors who would sometimes interfere with them, which, of course, being the jump scare guy that I am, the actor in my room started realizing that, oh, this guy scares easily. So the actor in my room was having a very good time getting me. But basically, you were given a list of items that you had to find. The person watching you on a security camera had a microphone and that you could hear them, and they would direct you around the room as to where to find and look for the items, and then you had to collect the items in a bucket. My thing about it was I wish it were even longer than it was. I think you were in there approximately 10 minutes, and you had to unscramble words that were clues to figure out what items your partner had to get, and then you had to direct them on how to search the room, and as they were searching room, there were characters inside the room kind of interfering with their search. So it was very, very fun. It actually was pretty intense because you knew you had a time limit. You knew that you had to accomplish things to score points. And it was actually a lot of fun. I hope they take this format and they do something else with it and experiment more with it, because I think this has a lot of potential of being a lot of fun. And I'm really glad I got a chance to do it. I think I was there on their second to last night or something. And finally, there was one play-like event, which unfortunately Mike was scheduled for something else. I went with a couple of friends, Jake and Ty and Allison, and Speakeasy Society is an immersive theater company that I found their work a couple of productions ago. I absolutely love these guys. I think they're fascinating. They are working on a 3-play cycle of Johnny Got His Gun, which one of those cycles was performed this year, and there's 2 more cycles coming. And I've done an immersive play with them that took place literally in a working bar and restaurant where I had to go meet a character at the bar and there was a sort of a short play performed that I basically eavesdropped on. And they did a production called The Hollow this year. It was for 1 week. It was the week of Halloween. And basically what you did was you went to a meal. There was a 3-course meal served during the course of the show. And what was going on is you were basically going to this meal, which was taking place at a town meeting of the folks from Sleepy Hollow. So as you were eating, the mayor of Sleepy Hollow would come over and welcome you and ask, how long you'd been in the territory. There were a couple of mischievous characters who would try to tell you stories and gossip about other characters. And as the first, you sat down, if you had a glass of wine or they offered you a drink or whatever, like during that piece of theater, you would start to meet some of the characters and you would start to get some of the background information on other characters in Sleepy Hollow. The interesting thing about this was if you've read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow anytime recently, there's kind of a reference in that about that there are witches in the mountains nearby. The Hollow creates this mythology sort of that the witches, that there are reasons that Sleepy Hollow is doing well, and it involves the witches protecting Sleepy Hollow. And as this meal unfolds, as you're literally being served dinner and meeting some of these characters, interacting with characters, you realize that they have to pay a price for the witches to protect Sleepy Hollow. And by the end of the show, they pull you out of the dinner into small groups, and you start roaming around the event space, which was at the Golden Road Brewery out in Glendale. And you went up into sort of an attic area, and they took you out and back in the alley behind the dumpster, and there was a scene performed there. And what you started to realize is you were getting the backstories and that deals were made to keep the town safe. And there may or may not be a human sacrifice by the end of dessert. And that is sort of where I will leave it. But I will say this about Speakeasy Society. Anything that they do, I have really enjoyed, and I highly recommend you checking them out. If you look up Speakeasy Society online, you'll find their website. I thoroughly enjoyed The Hollow. Thought it was a wonderful experience and very experimental and really just tons of fun. And very intriguing because everyone there, I'm sure, got a slightly different experience because you meet different characters depending on where you were seated in the room. I should also point to Speakeasy Society also is one of those companies that likes to give little special scenes if you pay attention. And at the very beginning of this, Jake and I basically got pulled aside and were offered deals of our own for our souls before the show ever began. And that was a really interesting little scene, and I was very happy to have gotten it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was very intriguing. The actor was definitely messing with our heads. So
if you'd like information on any of the things we discussed, you can check out the link section at myhauntlife.com. So that about does it. That was a recap of Russell and my haunt season. It was a busy season. It was a fantastic season.
It was an exhausting season.
Yeah. There was definitely way, way, way more good than bad. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you feel free to email us at contact@myhauntlife.com or mike@myhauntlife.com or russell@myhauntlife.com. And Russell has 2 S's and 2 L's. So don't forget that because he gets mad when you don't remember that.
Well, I just get frustrated.
Yeah. And with that being said, thanks again for listening. I'm Mike.
And I am Russell. Thank you.
We'll talk to you next time. And I just realized that we probably should not have said anything that we just said.